Thank you. It's a delight. So I'm here with Brian Nosek, and he is a professor of psychology, and he's running the Center for Open Science, I believe, right? That's that's the name of it. So maybe if we take a step back, and I'm just curious about your journey into becoming a researcher and becoming, you know, somebody that is studying the world and studying social science. So where did this all begin? What's your story? How did you get involved in
Yeah.
the academic research game?
Well, the short version is I went to undergrad at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in computer engineering, assuming that I would become a engineer in Silicon Valley or something. And in my fourth year of undergrad, I started taking psychology and women's studies courses for fun because, take a break from the hard engineering classes and do these,
I did the same thing
entertaining
too.
psych
Yeah, I
and
did
women's studies.
sociology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my grades in engineering started to dive because I was spending all of my time thinking about the psych and women's studies courses. I was like, oh, you can do science on people. This is amazing. This is so exciting. And it just, totally changed my view of what's possible to be as a person in the world, the careers that opened up. And so I had a tearful phone call with my parents saying I want to change my major in my fourth year, and said, "Are you crazy?" I said, "Oh, the internet thing, that's not going to be a thing, and psychology is where it's at, and okay, go for it." And so I switched to psych, and immediately was sort of like, I want to do the science. So I have to go to grad school, and so that was uh, I was just obsessed at that point, and so there I went.
And that was it? How did you choose to get into the graduate school that you went to? Was it just a random chance event?
Yeah, I think it was the intersection of interest in psychology and the science of human behavior, and I was taking these women's studies courses and just was fascinated by gender stereotypes and the expectations that we have of men and women. And this is just a curiosity for me in the my early 20s of why is it that gender is such a big deal? I don't get it. So that combination drove my search for potential labs to work in, and I was just looking for researchers that were kind of interested in understanding that issue and unpacking it. And several labs I considered. The one I landed in was Mahzarin Banaji's lab at Yale. And it was right at the time where she and her colleague, Tony Greenwald, who was her graduate advisor, had just sort of leaned into this concept of implicit bias and was starting to think about it theoretically and looking at different ways to try to measure it. And when I got there, I was like, oh, this is super cool. Like, we have thoughts and feelings that we're not aware of and might not be able to control how they're expressed. I can put my hands around that idea and see how might that contribute to these things relating to gender and why people make assumptions about this. She's going to do this or he's going to be like that. So that was just sort of how I sort of got the love of, oh, here's what I want to do, and that's who I want to do it with.
Um, I mean, it's funny because I think about so my undergrad was in engineering as well. And I
Yeah.
think about the most influential courses that I took. First of all was sociological theory. And then the other one was gender studies or family studies.
Is that
It
right?
was just
Yeah.
really like eye-opening
Right.
of questioning, just some of the things that we understand in the world. And then you start thinking like, well,
What
why?
else? Yeah.
Yeah,
Why? Exactly.
you,
How did
you
it get
know?
this way? Why does it stay this way?
Yeah, I
Does
know.
anyone
But
really
like,
believe this stuff? Yeah.
yeah, and I keep like trying to figure out. Even today, I'm like, why aren't we moving forward with some of these things? It seems like it's such a simple problem,
Yes.
but but it's really not, as you know, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, that's exactly right. It's the sort of realization and going through a lot of that was this understanding, emergent understanding that it's not just about my intentions that I end up behaving this way or that way. We are
yeah,
embedded in a system that sort of makes, constrains, sustains all sorts of stuff that everybody in the system just says, well, that's kind of weird. And some really object, and others just kind of like, yeah, whatever. And then others feel like, well, I have to, if I'm in the system, I should sort of say that, no, it must be right. That must be a good reason that we treat people that way. But then that all gets embedded in our own minds and even influences our own behavior without us realizing it. And that's such a challenge of, it's not just having the values and wanting to express their values. It's dealing with the systems that they occur in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that brings me to where did this whole open science initiative or thought come from? How did you actually begin? Because I remember listening or reading about your research with replications.
Yeah.
And how did that come about? Because I think, in my view, that's a massively bold step. To basically, so the way that I talk about it on this channel, I'm not sure if you probably haven't seen it anyways, but you kind of have to give the world a bit of the middle of the finger, like you have to have like a lot of courage to stand up and say, hey, I need to investigate this thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's like a deeply rooted assumption that we do is that we can replicate all of our science.
Yeah.
And then you found out something interesting. So I don't know if you want to talk about that story of how did you arrive upon this? Because I mean, I'm assuming most people would probably say, don't do that. That would be.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was a very common piece of feedback.
Yeah.
What's funny is that the answer is kind of the same as getting into psychology. And that what we were just talking about this recognition of systems and how our values are sometimes hard to express. And that for me, it was the awakening for wanting to go into open science was in my second year of grad school. Maybe it was my first year. I think it was second year. I took a research methods class with Alan Kasdan. So this is 1997. And we read all these papers by icons in the research methodology, Paul Meehl and Tony Greenwald and Jacob Cohen and Bob Rosenthal. And they're all writing about all these problems in the credibility of the literature. Like, we put all the null results away, we'd ignore those. And so it makes the literature pretty unreliable. And we underpower our studies, so we're much less likely to actually detect the things that we're looking for, or will be exaggerated, the things we do detect, than what they are in reality. And we're reading all these papers and talking about it among the students, like, oh man, this is such big challenges for the credibility of literature. And for me, it was sort of like, wait a second. They wrote these papers in 1962, 1969, 1975. We're here in the late 90s reading them like, oh yeah, this is a big problem. Like 30 years have gone by. Like what is happening? And in the papers, they not just detail the problems, they detail the solutions. Like we should replicate. We should, try to be clear about what was planned in advance and what happened after. We should increase our sample sizes. And it's this same situation with gender. Everyone in the room says, yes, these are things we should do. No one in the room is going to do those things. Because they're embedded in a system that says to advance your career, you got to get exciting findings, you got to do all these things. And none of those things are aligned with what these papers identify as ways to improve the actual credibility of the literature. So that's how I got into it. But, that's 1997. The Center for Open Science was founded in 2013. It's a lot of time in between those. And that time is, how I would explain it is that time was incrementally me doing the things that I could do with the opportunities available to me, the resources available to me, to try to start to address those challenges. And I did not have a lot of resources as a grad student or as an early career faculty member to try to make change in the world, but I could try to make change in my own work. So just as one example, in 1998, now a year later, I was allocated by my department, standard what happens for psychologists is you get a certain number of hours of the undergrads in the psych classes to conduct studies with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I got 15 hours allocated to me for an entire semester. I'm like, I can run 15 participants in the entire semester? Like, what research could I possibly do that has substantial power with 15 participants? And that's not, I won't even get one study done. This is ridiculous. No wonder people can't do high powered research. So I pitched to my advisors, you know what, we could do our measures online, to collect data from people we don't even see. They don't even have to come to the lab. There's this internet thing that turns out it is a thing. And we should maybe use it for data collection. And so we built a website called Project Implicit where people could try out our measures of trying to assess implicit biases. And they learn something and debate about what it all means. And we get some data about all that stuff. And we got 50,000 people in the first 3 days coming to the website. Like, it was
What?
mind-blowing. 15 people in a semester, 50,000 people in 3 days. I'm like, okay, I have just solved a problem in my methodology with a new technology. This is awesome, right?
Huh.
And so this is just an opportunity then to say, okay, we can improve our research. And now that website gets, a few million people every year visiting it and completing measures. And so it was great for improving the power and all this sorts of stuff. But it was something that I could control. And so this is sort of a long, winding answer to your question, but all of it was sort of in this direction of what is it that I can do now to try to improve the credibility of my research. And then when we got some funding, we could turn the attention to how might we improve the credibility of research more generally with new technologies, and then tackling this systems problem.
Yeah. So obviously you had to make a lot of choices along the way where you had to prioritize doing what is, valid and reliable versus a thing that's a little bit more expedient. And that's a choice that we always make. And it's like such a difficult choice. And because our jobs rely on it, right? It's not like it's not like we're being frivolous. Is that we might not get a job, we might not get tenure, all these different things. And it's such a there's just a lot of pressure on pushing that back. How do you do that? Like, what's your strategy to keep coming back to what you think is valid and reliable science?
So there's lots to say on that. I think the simplest answer for me is that I am very willing to fail. And what I mean by that is that for the things that I really value, I really love science. I love science because of the potential to confront ourselves with things we didn't know before and to gain new insights about how the world might work, and the curiosity and creativity that goes into the pursuit of knowledge. I love that. And so I want to pursue it in the way that I love it, which is how we learned about how science is supposed to work, and in its idealized form, not in the chasing grants and writing papers and blah, 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 that is the fundamentals of the reward system. So for me, I feel all of those challenges that everybody feels, but I land on, more often than not, but I want to do it the way that feels genuine. Is the way that I love doing it. And I'm not afraid. What I mean by not afraid to fail is if it ends up that I can't get a job in academics by doing it this way, okay, I'll go do something else. If it means that I won't get tenure doing it this way, okay, I'll go do something else. Because for me, the alternative is I'm going to do it the way that I don't value, and I won't feel very good about myself or even about the work, and I'll still have that job. Is that the life that I want? I don't think so. I don't think that's the life that I want. So I'll fail. I'll do it the way I think, and if I fail, I fail. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that is my answer.
Brian, do you mind if I call you Brian?
Sure, of course. That is
Yeah,
my name.
you're
As I
preaching
like
to
to
the
say, only my mother calls me Dr. Nosek.
choir. I say the same thing too. Yeah, no, you're preaching to the choir. That's the way I
Yeah.
often have to think about things, because there are many moments along what we actually do where we have to decide, this is going to require a lot more work, or I feel uncomfortable with this particular solution. What do I do
Yeah.
here? And I can sort of compartmentalize. Not to say that, we often, because I'm assuming you're probably similar, like my engineering background makes me very practical, so I end up having to, like, do some of the practical stuff anyways, but doing things that are, in the pursuit of valid, reliable insight that sometimes is not very interesting,
Yeah.
requires you to just decide to actually do it.
Yeah.
And that to me, that's one of the more trickier things that we face. Um,
Right. Right.
and and from what I've gathered, that's often something that I kind of harp upon online, and it seems to be something that people resonate with.
Yeah.
That they're always coming back to that. And
Yeah.
then, so then, if that's the case, how do you build an infrastructure around yourself so that you can continuously keep coming back? For me, it's distancing, right? It's
Mm.
creating this boundary between myself, my family, and the outside world. I'm not sure what your infrastructure is, so that you could keep coming back to feeling good about making the right choice, that you deem as the right choice. Maybe it's not the right choice for everybody, but for yourself.
Yeah. And that makes me think of your earlier comment of of a lot of these things when we challenge the status quo, it can be difficult because other people are unhappy. The it creates a lot of heat, and you have to kind of sort through where is the light in all of this, uh, and inevitably, especially when it becomes highly debated or contentious, you have to deal with your own like sort of defensiveness against that versus humility of trying to hear where there are concerns and how to incorporate that. And you don't want to you want to pursue righteousness without being self-righteous, and that's a hard thing to navigate, which is like we are trying to improve our part of the world and trying to do better, and simultaneously I'm not better than anybody else, I'm just trying to do that, and how is it that we can do it together? So the intermix of that challenge and constraint and energy and everything else with that genuine sort of I'm, I'm, I want to stay true to the values, the principles, the problems that I'm trying to solve is not easy. And the hardest moments are those where I feel like people are, angry, bitterly angry, and I feel simultaneously that it's unjust. The
Hmm.
where I where I'm grateful for that. It's hard to hear when I'm grateful for it is when I get critique in those moments and I say, oh man, that was a good point. Like,
Yeah.
oh, it hurts ego, but it feels like, oh, okay, now I've learned something here and they're helping me to actually improve. But those moments where, a colleague says you're going to ruin the field, and I say, why? And it's because they're going to do some replications to see if our findings are robust. Like I'm going to ruin the field like that sense of injustice. So what do I retreat to where you started from? Partly it's totally insular, which is when I go back to those values, those principles, am I staying true to it? Right. And that has some degree of uh, stabilization. And
Yeah.
of course, being able to separate from it also. Like, yes, this is the mission of our organization, the mission of myself as an academic researcher, does dominate my mind share and how I feel about myself and about my work.
Yeah.
But I also have other parts of life that, when that's going poorly, I hope will go well. Two great kids that are always challenging and invigorating, a spouse that likewise challenging and invigorating. We do very well together and
Yeah.
lots of growth together, and that can exist independently of how
Yeah.
well the work is going. And then what really is, in the direct sense of the work, is having knowledge that there are some others that have the same ideals.
Mhm.
So one of, I think, the most powerful things of the open science reform movement that has congealed over the last decade is that there have been many people before that time felt like they had these values, these goals, but were all alone. The only person in their department, nobody else is talking about this stuff, and they just have to bottle it up. What the movement provided was access to, oh, there are other people. Maybe not a lot of idealists on these issues, but there are. I'm not by myself. And that bringing together of that community for me has been incredibly powerful for helping to feel like there is a safeguard against some of the more challenging parts of the social part of trying to engage people on very difficult topics.
So that's one thing that I've been sort of struggling to find. So I'm trying to do so. What I've discovered. So I started out with building the whole reciprocity project as this like platform to help us write and do research better. Because in
Yeah.
what ended up happening was in my graduate school, I was like focusing on I can't write. That's not my forte.
Yeah.
I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
I figured out that I had ADHD many years later. That was it's hard for me to put sentences together sometimes. So I
Yeah.
built this platform, put it online, and nobody paid attention to it. But then I started talking about some of the things that we go through, and I've sort of resonated with some folks. But I'm curious, and this is where I'm going to, is I'm really interested is how were you able to build this tribe behind what you're doing and have other people see what you're actually doing? Like, was there a specific person that said, um, Brian, what you're doing is very important, keep going with it? Or was it just you leading the charge? What's the story? Like, how did you end up doing the Open Science Foundation? In a sense, it's actually at this point I would say it's probably having an impact. I think it
I
is,
hope so.
but
Yeah.
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 um what happened there? What's the
Yeah.
what was the turning point at that you
Right.
started to know that this was right?
Yeah. The In some ways, the answer is quite easy, which is for these issues of replicability, trust in research, credibility of findings, the challenges, as those papers from the 1960s and 70s illustrated, have long been known. The opportunities for improvement have long been known, not shared by everybody, but out there in the
Mm-hmm.
world. Uh, and so the simple action, like one specific example, was, you know what, we're all arguing about replicability, but we're arguing about it in theory. Really, we should have some evidence, right? We do science. So let's see if replicability is actually a challenge by doing a bunch of replications. I can't do that by myself. So how about we do it as a group? We'll each do a replication. We'll aggregate them together. Okay, how about that? So write up a Google Doc saying here's sort of a basic of a design of a crowdsourced project to do a bunch of replications. Send out an email to a listserv and say, anybody else want to do some replication studies? And then 60 people suddenly say, yeah, I want to do that. That's something I've been concerned about. I care about that too. So sometimes if it's, this is an example, I think, of that hitting an issue that already is out there, that just needs a catalyst of we can do something about it. And giving that catalyst being something that is not a massive ask, but is just enough of, I'm not telling you to go run 50 replications. I'm saying, do you want to participate in one?
Hmm.
And if 49 other people participate, then we're actually going to get somewhere.
Hmm.
Like, oh, okay, yeah, I see that. And ultimately, it ended up being 270 co-authors, 383 people contributing in some fashion, completing 100 replication studies, because we could organize around something that was already of shared interest, and we didn't ask too much of anyone. So that's one project example. And I feel like most of what we've done through the Center for Open Science is repeating that basic script again and again and again for how is it that the other parts of the research culture might be improved. We need a
Hmm.
better policy framework. So let's create the top guidelines. Maybe a group of us can sort of think through what is it that you'd want to be more transparent in a report for it to be valuable as whether it's credible or not. Okay, let's make that. And maybe we can shop that around and see if editors are willing to adopt those guidelines for their journal. Don't have to solve the whole world, just solve your piece. To funders, to this, to this, that. So those are the big pieces. The other thing I'll say is that I had an opportunity that is a very unusual event that's, I don't know if it's replicable at all, which is the work that we were doing on this replication got some news coverage, the initial efforts, and we were building this infrastructure just self-funded. I give talks about implicit bias, and we're using that to build the first version of the OSF. And John Arnold from the Laura and John Arnold Foundation noticed it and directed his program officer named Stuart Buck to chat us up. And over a course of several weeks, then gave us $5 million to start the Center for Open Science. So
Wow.
if you can get, a philanthropist to give you $5 million, it can change a lot of things and what's possible to do, right? But that doesn't happen very often.
No.
And so it is, I am very proud of the work that I've done and the way that I've approached it and all of that. But I also recognize that I am the recipient of dumb luck, enormous privilege, enormous opportunity that others could have done things similar or better things with as I have had the opportunity to do.
But you must have been able to craft the story such that people were able to um, pick up on it. Like it was definitely maybe something that other people were resonating with at
Yeah.
that moment. It wasn't necessarily um, you're sort of channeling energy, I guess, somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these problems are all very complex, right? All the
Yeah.
things that you were talking about, like how do we communicate our message? How do we write? I mean, there's so many things that go into that. How
Yeah.
does the system of science work? There's so many things, right? So it can feel completely overwhelming, these kinds of problems. And so part of making it so that people feel empowered, that they have efficacy to actually do something is to try to isolate and identify, here is a path. Here is a thing that you can do, and here is the difference that it would make. And if you can articulate that amid the complexity, they say, okay, I understand that it's more complex, but if I start here, I can get there. And I like the sound of that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing is like, especially online, is that I sort of recognize that there's lots of people that are not part of a good PhD program, for example,
Yeah.
or a good research team, and they feel very alone.
Yeah.
And trying to like just reach out to them and say, "Hey, you're totally normal. There's
Yes.
many other people that are out there feeling the same way."
Yeah.
And it's me just screaming at the camera. Sometimes it feels really strange, but to repeat
Yeah.
that you're going to be okay, I think sometimes
Yeah.
that's what people need to hear.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. especially in research, which is
Yeah.
so isolated as an
Absolutely.
activity.
It's so isolating.
Right.
No, that's it. Yeah. Yeah. You spend hours and hours and weeks and months and
Yeah.
years like
Yeah.
by yourself. So,
Right. Going
yeah,
down and down the rabbit hole of whatever.
absolutely. And yeah, you kind of feel like you're going your mind. So there's many days that I would spend where I wouldn't even see anybody other than my wife at the end of the
Yeah.
day. And it was like, oh God, this is crazy. But normalizing this experience, I think has been really fun.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, so I want to go back to you were telling me about this major research article that had a lot of impact in the field. Tell me about the moment when you looked at the data and and you're like, uh-oh, um, this is maybe not as positive as I was hoping it to be.
Yeah.
What was that like? And then how did you think about, oh gosh, we probably need to figure out a way to communicate this appropriately?
Yeah. The project is called the Reproducibility Project in Psychology, and it took 5 years to get it done. The well, I guess it was a little bit shorter than that. Maybe it was 4 years. But the most of the time in doing the project was super just focused on the challenge of keeping 100 different replication studies moving and coordinating about how the data will be gathered and aggregated, and just a lot of in the weeds. And I stayed as just the project coordinator. As I stayed blind to the what was happening in any of the replication outcomes. They were all doing their work and getting their results, but they were keeping them. Each individual team was keeping their results to themselves, essentially. And the two project coordinators, Hannah Cahoon and Mallory Kidwell, were managing it individually, but not sharing data. So they all got it into a spreadsheet, and then it came time to sort of then, okay, we're going to do the analysis and write the paper now. And I had even been writing the paper before seeing any of the data. So just sort of setting up the frame. So one part of the answer was design the project and most of the framing about its purpose to be entirely independent of what the outcomes would be, so that we could say, look, this was the goal. It was a question. There isn't a hypothesis to test here. The question is, when we try to do good faith replications of 100 studies, how many do we get to successfully replicate on a variety of different criteria? And then whatever the answer, we'll sort of talk about what the implications of that might be for the credibility of the literature, if and how we need to improve it, et cetera. So that descriptive stance was a protective for whatever the outcomes in order to think about how to frame and write the paper. And we've used that same mindset for subsequent major replication studies in cancer biology, and one that's we're writing right now, in fact, across the social sciences, called SCORE. But the observing the outcomes, it was like, oh, okay, this wasn't just in theory that Greenwald and Cohen and Rosenthal and everybody else. Like we really tried. I was so impressed with all of the people that conducted these replication studies, because this was something new. It was risky. People were upset about replications happening, but they were real attentive and put their all into doing these as well as possible. Not to say that they're error free at all, just to say that this was a real genuine effort. And then to have those outcomes be so frequently not consistent with the original was just sort of like, okay, this is transitioning from this debate in theory where everybody can sort of retain whatever position they want, to here is some evidence, and we're going to be arguing about the evidence. So people who were optimistic about credibility are going to treat this evidence skeptically. Like, wait a second, that's, you guys screwed it up. Terrible replicators. People who have been saying, I can't trust anything in literature, would say, oh, see, we were right. And probably it's even lower. You probably accidentally replicated some. So it was very clear that it was going to generate a lot of discussion. But like all these other things, it felt like this is the discussion we need to have if we're really working towards maximizing credibility. We need to be able to interrogate our evidence and then talk about what we observe from that and turn that into a productive discussion, not just antagonism.
So this entire process, I was thinking as you were talking about it, I was like, this is difficult, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not necessarily logistically, it's very difficult talking about replication. Like, good luck trying to replicate any study, just in the fact of, I know that you had a procedure. I guess you had to arrive upon this procedure to get this replication. I think it was like you replicated the first result, right, in every paper, if I
Yeah,
remember.
I think it was the last experiment was the default one that we selected. It wasn't the
Okay.
first. Gosh, the fact that I don't remember that at the top of my
Oh,
head is
that's
that's amazing. That sort of shows how much time has gone. But yes, there was systematic design decisions to try to figure out how to do this with as minimal bias as possible.
yeah. So even of that, there's so to me it was almost somewhat hopeful as well that you could even get. I think it was what 43%.
Yeah, yeah,
um, uh, of the studies were replicated. To me, that's still hopeful. That's not saying like everything that we've done is
right,
irrelevant, right? Like you wouldn't expect 100% replication.
right, right.
Um, you would probably, given statistical likelihood, you probably would expect somewhere around that level. But then you're teasing apart which ones were able to replicate and which ones were not, which sparked a whole bunch of conversation where you should go after that.
Right.
So I think, so this is where I think it's super important to reframe the discussion, and coming back to where we started was we have this emphasis on this massive emphasis on success and performance and doing well in the field, and instead of just taking this question of can we just do good science instead, right? Because you were able to generate a lot of discussion, and I'm assuming some of those things that were not replicated, somebody has gone through and replicated them again or found moderating conditions and when that actually happens. So it was very, very fruitful,
Yeah,
but then it's also sort of this emotional performance
yeah.
aspect of things, I think, uprooted a lot of
That's
a
right.
lot of fields, a lot of people.
That's
Um,
right.
so, can you talk about how you are able to keep the conversation going when you are touching upon these sort of more sensitive things, or being able to have the confidence to get back up and do it again?
Yeah. Uh, I think for me, the key in all of those was that the fundamental goal is the pursuit of truth. And that, people can put that on a pedestal in a way that they use to rationalize treating other people poorly. Look, the only reason I'm saying you're an idiot is because you're wrong. We're about pursue the truth. That I don't think is a real productive way to foster science as a social enterprise. But there are many people that will excuse poor behavior because they point at this pursuit of truth. So, what I like to emphasize for myself and for our approach that makes it so that this feels productive and I want to keep doing it is that yes, it is about the pursuit of truth at its fundamental core, but it is also recognition that science is a human enterprise and that people's ego, ideals, goals, everything else are tied to their work. And so a fundamental respect, starting from a fundamental respect for people, and simultaneously this sense of we're holding ourselves collectively accountable to the quality of our evidence, has been a way to, even when there's been a lot of heat, keeping those in mind has made it easier for me, at least, to navigate the heat with just trying to stay even keeled of, let me tell you again why we're doing this and how we're doing it, how we're making decisions. Let me try to figure out how to give you a voice in the process. Say, you say you don't like our design. Okay, let's figure out a way for you to say that out loud so people can see it. Because I'm not going to say that I'm going to agree with you, but I do think that part of the scholarly dialogue is for this to be heard, that your point of view, my point of view, and otherwise, and we'll ideally we'll all learn something. And so that in 95% of cases has been able to turn what was otherwise contentious, I don't know, things that were otherwise contentious, for me, wound up being productive with that stance. Others that were in these dialogues with me might say, no, he was an asshole and it wasn't productive at all. I can't, so I don't want to speak for anybody else. But in terms of staying engaged, that has been helpful. And the 5% where it just could not turn into a productive dialogue, just are, they're depressing.
Yeah. So one thing I want to actually point out, when I reached out to you, it was a Sunday morning. I'm a random dude. You probably don't even know. Like
random dude. I like that. You should get
and as well, you replied, right? I don't expect people to reply on a Sunday, but I just want people to recognize. I think some of the things that you're talking about, you're a genuine human being. And then I contacted your administrative staff after. I think it's Doria.
Doreen.
And then she went above and beyond, and she told me to go do this thing and over here. And I was just amazed in how you're able to build this culture into a rather large organization right now. That's part of a university. Well, I'm not sure. I'm assuming it's distinct from the university, but you're still.
It's an independent nonprofit. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how are you able to do what? How'd you get to that point? I mean, it's not. I've seen a lot of people take money and essentially destroy what they were given of them, in the university system. How did you build this organization that is considered legitimate? And lots of people probably do want to talk to you and see what you have to think.
Well, the answer is the cliche answer, which is working with people that have the same ideals, that are motivated by the same mission, and are committed to advancing that. So that's been the biggest gratification of this work, as we talked about earlier in the conversation, of finding people in the community that are like, this is my passion too. And I want to work on this, and I want to improve how science works. And that's, I'm frustrated by how the system is, and I have ideas. And we have a very diverse team of, only a small portion of the 50 staff at the center are themselves researchers. Many of the staff are from totally different fields, engineers and marketing specialists and operations researchers, but they all care in a common way about science should be credible. Like, it matters for my family. It matters for me. It matters for my aging parents. It matters for the world, that we get trustworthy knowledge that we can use for the betterment of humanity. And so that shared core value is the organizing principle for everything else. that the team does. The other part that I'll just say is, you called it out as, responding on a Sunday, is that there people there's different ways to be engaged in one's work, and all of them are legitimate and they're distinct, right? And this creates tensions in social media because sometimes people are judgmental of one when they're not that one, right? So there's this, the way people describe, you can have a job, you can have a career, you can have a mission, and they imply different degrees of engagement, to different degrees to which it defines one's identity. And being in academic research, you can be any of those three. It's totally fine to treat it as a job. Totally. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And the passions and the values that you have in life and everything else, the meaning, can be acquired from outside. It's totally fine to treat it as a career. And it's totally fine to treat it as a mission. All of those are legitimate ways of engaging in academic research, or really any other occupation. And so the part of the organization part is like, for me, as I've said, it is a mission. Like, this is my life, and I have also the kids and family part. Those are the two things I try to do well in my life.
Or like
yeah right, yeah, let's not get into details here. But there are some on the team that care about the mission, but it is their job. And a healthy organization will be just as supportive of that person, the role that they play, the importance that they have to the organization, as someone else that this is their life. And so that, I think, is, in some dysfunctional organizations, founders are often mission oriented, like this is their whole thing, and they expect everyone else to be that too. And it creates this very difficult atmosphere of nothing's ever enough. And that part I try to be very attentive to, of the expectations I have for myself are not the expectations that I have or that the organization has for anybody else.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about, probably just have a couple more questions. I was just thinking about.
Yeah, I have another thing coming up. So.
Yeah, no problem. That might be a good message to send to researchers as well, right? I think recognizing that we're all different in different ways and we have different priorities, recognizing that, I'm often screaming at the screen of saying, hey, you're just good enough. You're fine with who you are.
Exactly. It's that genuineness, right? That is so important. And what people really will feel better about in the end is if they can engage with it genuinely.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't get to it, you get to it another day. That's the way I sort of think about it.
Yeah.
What would you, so if you were in my circumstance, I'm trying to build this reciprocity project to essentially give hope and build solutions for us to make our life easier as researchers. What would you want me to do in terms of building this into the platform? The way that I'm sort of thinking about it is, I have, we have a salary, right? And if I give 10% or 15% of everything that I ever make to do this in terms of resources, then I could probably build something that's pretty cool over the course of 30 years. And I'm assuming you probably have something similar in your mind. What would you do in terms of starting all over again and doing something that you think is important for the field of science? I would say that you're very much an entrepreneur. Maybe lots of people might not see it, but I see that. So what would you get me to do at this moment to have the same impact that you have?
Yeah, I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur until after the fact. It was sort of like someone said that you've started 3 organizations. Oh, you're right. Oh, I guess that is what I do. Huh, that's interesting. So there's identity issues there. So insight, self-insight sometimes is lacking, even when you're not. So I don't know the right answer because I think there's lots of good answers. But the approach that resonates for me is there is a long-term aspiration. Like for the center, it is to improve the research culture so that transparency, openness, reproducibility are valued. For my broader academic and personal interest, it's aligning the values that we have with our daily practice. Like that's my big picture mission. We say that these are what we want to be like, these are our intentions, this is what we're trying to do. How do we get our behavior to be aligned with that?
How do you
That's
get the institutions to align? Yeah.
Institutions, the reward systems, the biases that come up from within us. How do we deal with all of that so that our intentions and our actions are aligned? If I could solve that for the entire world, then I would have achieved what my goals are. Okay, that's a big aspiration. So for me, the sort of the starting over again in any domain is like, what could I do now that would not get to there, but provide an incremental step that builds momentum toward there? Given the resources that I have, given the things that I can do, what is it that I could define as a step that itself has value? And the concept that to me is very useful is a common engineering project management concept of agile development, right? Is that you're always delivering something that has value to the users, and then you just iterate and improve it over time, rather than you build the whole system and then you deliver it and hope that it works. And you have to do that for some things like a space shuttle. You can't just say, oh, we'll build a little shuttle and maybe it'll get halfway there. Nope, it has to get all the way there and back. So it doesn't work for all problems, but the problems that I like to tackle, it is, I want to do something by the end of the week is providing some value for somebody, and then build from there. And that approach, I think, is responsive to whatever the resources are that are available, and provides on-ramps for others to say, I have ways that I could contribute to that too. And I love that collaborative model for solving some of these big problems, because most of them we can't solve on our own.
And it's also very forgiving of yourself, right?
Yeah. Right. False starts, errors, that's part of the process.
Well, I wish I could spend so much more time talking to you. You seem like a genuine human being, not to mention, a luminary figure in science. I just appreciate every moment of being able to do this, and hopefully I get to bump into you someday.
Yeah, for
and just to say thanks for everything that you're doing. It takes a lot of courage. It's scary. And what you're doing, I think, is actually really good for the scientific field. Thank you.
Because it is also fun and rewarding. So it's sort of yes and with all of that. So, but I really appreciate the invitation and the work that you're doing to reach out to people, help them with knowing that they're not alone in these challenges, because we all experience them. So
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take